Welcome back, everyone. Our next session dives into generative AI, its transformative potential for business models. Please welcome Dr. Samir Hasija, Dean of Executive Education and Dean of Asia Campus, INSEAD, to guide us through this topic.
Thank you very much. Good morning. All right, let me try again. Good morning. All right. So I decided to stand up, if you don't mind, because given my height, people in the back won't be able to see me if I stand here. So I think this way I'm visible to everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and talk about this topic. I don't know how you feel, but I feel this is one of the most important topics in the world, but I'm obviously biased. This is a topic that I study, and it's a topic that's very close to my research. But my guess is that this is not an overstatement, that potentially what generative AI as a technology can do can fundamentally shift, can have a paradigm shift in the way we think about work, the way we think about businesses, the way we think about life in general. So I thought I'll spend some time speaking to you about this and perhaps make it interactive. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. I have been informed that you are not shy in asking questions. So I welcome questions throughout the session. For those who don't know INSEAD, I don't want to spend too much time on INSEAD, but I'll just quickly introduce. We are a business school. We are a global business school. We started in Europe, in France, and we were started after World War II, actually at the back of the Treaty of Rome. And the whole idea of starting INSEAD after World War II by the founders was that business leaders need to create more economic activity amongst each other in all different countries so as to reduce the chances of another war. So the mission was a very noble mission, that if there's more activity that is globally interlinking countries with each other from an economic point of view, chances are that we would not fight with each other. That's not completely true in this world, unfortunately, but our hope is that that mission still holds some value, and so that's what we do. We moved out of France, not moved out, we expanded from France, because if the mission is really true, then it has to be a global mission and not just a European mission. So we started our campus in Asia, in Singapore, and next year we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary of having our Asia campus. So that's a big milestone for us. And through Asia, we've been interacting with a larger part of the world, but still not enough. So we started a campus in Abu Dhabi to kind of interact with the Middle East as well as Africa through Abu Dhabi. And finally, we started a campus in San Francisco, a very small campus, but we have one. Our timing was perfect. We started it about 3 weeks before COVID. So clearly in business school, we don't have foresight, but that's another topic. But we've been operating now in San Francisco for about 4 years. So we're very happy that we have a global footprint. And I'm really happy to talk to you, especially in Thailand here, because over the last 25 years, we've developed a lot of relationships and partnerships in Thailand. So INSEAD specializes in creating executive education, especially customized executive education, which is bespoke for every organization that we work with, to try and do senior leadership development and really focus on senior leadership development for the organization. And for that reason, we've been very fortunate of partnering with many Thai organizations. Many of those are represented here in the audience, I'm quite sure. And one thing that INSEAD is very proud of is that every conversation that we'll have, and it's very important for us, is evidence-based, that it is driven by hard, rigorous analysis. And that is something that really differentiates us in the market, and we are very, very proud of that. So we are a research-based school, where every faculty member at INSEAD spends 80 to 90% of their time on searching and analyzing evidence to develop the frameworks that they use to have a conversation with senior executives like yourselves in a meaningful manner. And you can imagine that puts a lot of stress on our business, because 80 to 90% of the time, faculty are not available for having these conversations. It's only 10, 20% of their time that they're available, because most of their time they're spending searching for this evidence and being very rigorous about it. And so what I'll do today is, while this topic is very interesting, I'll try and share with you some evidence. Because if we don't think about frameworks using data, using evidence, I think we may be overgeneralizing. And that is one thing that bothers me a lot when I read some of these industry reports where there is a sweeping generalization and the cause and effect hasn't been clearly established. So, if you allow me, I will build the framework and this conversation for today based on some very hardcore evidence. Is that okay? Now, I do want to give a caveat. I am going to develop my framework using evidence. However, I do not have evidence to test the framework right now. So I'm being careful with my words. I do research and meta research to develop the framework. But the next step is now go back and retest the framework. Because all the research that I'm going to cite was not being used to develop the framework. This is my interpretation of that research. Now we need to go out there and test it, but that's going to take some time. Bad news is by the time I'm finished with this talk, the technology would have evolved, the data would have changed, and I'm not too sure what I need to do about that. So there's a bit of a race going on here. But what will not change is the process of thinking, right? So my data will become outdated, but the process with which I'm trying to get to the framework, I think that will remain, right? And I'm happy to take questions and, of course, comments, including even challenges where you think the framework doesn't work. I think that'll be interesting. So that's the ground rules of the talk today. We're good, right? Okay. So before we get started, quick question. When did you first hear about generative AI, Chat GPT, Gemini, Llama, or any one of these things? Like when was the first time that became central to your knowledge? Last year? So sometime 23? There are some early leaders here. But for by and large, most of you, year and a half, is that fair to say? Yeah. So I want to show you a slide from my class, which I used when I used to teach a lot more, from 2020. Now, the technology was not that evolved, right? Obviously, it's much sharper and much more evolved now. But that's not my point. The point I'm trying to make is, if you heard about it a year and a half ago, it's already too late. If FT is your source of knowledge, then you cannot create competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is when you know something before everybody else catches on to it. People are very fast at acting. So pure action cannot create competitive advantage. It can for some, but not for everybody. That everybody got the information at the same time, and you did better because you were able to act faster. It can create a source of advantage, but not all the time, because people catch up on the action part. But knowing something that others did not know, I think there is some advantage there. Now, I'm sure you'll ask me how. How can we know something that others don't know yet? I don't know. Everybody has to figure that out on your own, because it's a very individual thing, how you do it, how you don't. I have my own mechanism. I call it, and you've heard of this, reverse mentoring. I work a lot with PhD students. Every Friday, I meet my PhD students, my research group. And everybody in the research group, for the first 5 minutes, everybody takes 5 minutes, and their job is to tell me something that I didn't already know. Every week, we meet. And it could be about anything. It could be about the research we are doing. It could be about technology evolution. It could be about business. It could be about sports, something that I didn't know about. But the mindset that I've created in the team is that you need to constantly scan the world and look for information that others don't have yet. And it's become a bit of a challenge amongst our entire research group, right? So it's a very simple mechanism that I use, but you have to find your own mechanism of how you stay ahead of the curve, right? All right, that was just a simple point I wanted to make. Now, when it comes to this technology, I really want to bust some myths, okay? And so I'll build it one by one. Like I said, I want to develop a framework of when it is useful. Anyway, I came up with this quote. Let me see if the pointer can work. Yeah. So I said, new technologies often generate a lot of hype, right, and excitement. Most of these technologies will disappoint in the short term. And in the long term, many will fizzle out, but the few that remain will often outperform. By the way, you'll say, Samir, what does this have to do with generative AI? Nothing. I think this is just a general concept that I believe is true for most technologies in the world. There will obviously be exceptions, right? So for the sake of fun, I was playing with it. I fed this code into ChatGPT 4 and Gemini, 4.0 and Gemini. I said, okay, rewrite my code. So this is what ChatGPT 4.0 wrote, and this is what Gemini wrote. I like Gemini's text a fleeting flame, most fizzle and fade, but the resilient rise, reshaping life forever. So I read these quotes. I was like, fine, I still have a job. And don't tell me you like their quotes better than mine. Anyway, so I was just playing around with this. But let me start building my the point that I'm trying to drive. So, do you know what GitHub is? Right? Some of you may know GitHub. For those who don't, I don't know what's the best way to explain it. Think of it as the Instagram or Facebook for geeks. Okay, so you all go on Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media platform to share the food you ate and the photographs you took during your travel or something interesting article that you read. Nerds, I mean it in a nice way, by the way, I'm a geek myself. They go on GitHub and share software, code, programming code that they write, right? So there's a whole army of people out there that just share code, interesting code that they wrote. So GitHub ran this experiment with Copilot, all right, and what they did with Microsoft Copilot, and the whole idea there was, does this have impact on productivity? A lot of people are saying, well, this is going to create superhumans at work, right? We're going to have superhumans working for us. It'll augment humans in an amazing way. So they wanted to see, does it make sense or not? So they ran this experiment where they recruited, I'm sorry, the pointer is not very bright, but I'm sure you can follow it if you concentrate. They recruited about 95 programmers, gave them a very complicated job. The job was to write some code in JavaScript, which is pretty complex, okay? And what they said was, they said, listen, let's see what happens if we divide everybody into two groups. Half of them will not be given Copilot, so they'll have to do it all by themselves. The other half, roughly, will be given Copilot, so they'll get some assistant to work with them. All right, so that was the basic setting. And with that setting, what they found was, in the group that had access to Copilot, about 78% successfully finished the task, that they were able to successfully execute what was needed to be executed. The group that did not have, about 70%. So there was a marginal increase in the ability to do their work. But more importantly, the group that had Copilot actually did it in less than half the time. Now that's a massive productivity gain, if you ask me. Less than half the time for something which is quite knowledge and quite sophisticated. This is not regular run-of-the-mill kind of work. This required a fair amount of analytical thinking, which is not very easy for systems to understand and do, right? Especially general purpose systems. It's not like this Copilot was designed for software engineering. It was a general purpose Copilot, right? So which is just a typical natural language processing engine. And that turned out to be quite interesting. Fair enough? By the way, a side comment. For those of you who are not in the software industry, it is a great industry to follow. It is often a predictor of what will happen in any knowledge-based industry. So whatever software industry does, eventually knowledge-based work kind of mirrors it. So software industry went first to hybrid. Software industry went first to modularization of work. Software industry went first to having teams which are in a matrix organization, So a lot of things that happens in the software industry is a precursor to things that will happen in many other knowledge-based work environments, right? So just a good industry to follow in general. Okay, so while there are these positives, what we also find is that this technology, it's not perfect. And there's something called hallucination. Have you heard that term, hallucination, of this technology? And a lot of people tell me, Samir, hallucination is a bug. It's an error. And I push back, and I want you to think a little bit about this. Hallucination is not an error in the technology. It is a feature of that technology. It's a probability-based language model. The science of this model is that it is predicting what word will come after a particular set of words. By definition, it will make up stuff. It will not necessarily be accurate. The level of accuracy may become better with time because the probability models will get more fine-tuned, but it will always be a probability model. It will never become a perfect system. By the way, humans are also a probability model. So it's another thing to say, well, humans are always telling the truth. No, that's nonsensical. Quite the opposite, actually. Now, the interesting part about humans is you can't tell whether what they're saying is nonsense because they don't know or because they're purposefully misleading you. At least here there will not be any purposeful misleading, right? So that much you can trust. It'll just be because they didn't know. It just guessed the wrong thing. So the fact that it hallucinates is not a bug in the system. It's a feature of the system, and it will always remain a feature of the system. And any business thinking that you put in place based on that will require you to think deep and hard about, is that feature acceptable to you or not? If you're using this system to write medical prescriptions for emergency care, you have to be very, very careful. If you're using it to write a movie script, who cares if it makes up stuff, as long as it's sellable? Well, depending on what your aim is with the movie script. So nuance matters, context matters, which is why when I read reports which are generalization of this technology, where the nuance is not considered, it bothers me. Because these generalizations are extremely dangerous. Humans will get augmented. All knowledge work will now have GenAI. That's not true. Depends on what knowledge work you're talking about. What is the impact of that work? What is your risk tolerance for errors? I was in Frankfurt about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was giving a talk for the European ECB, for the European Commission Bank, right? It's a regulatory authority. The job of ECB is to regulate all European banks. And so we were talking about something known as reg tech or regulation technology. Now, ECB, as you can imagine, has to be extremely careful on how and when they use GenAI. It's a powerful technology, but for a regulatory authority, of getting it wrong could mean disaster, not to mention the political outcry. So it'll be both economic and political and societal issues. At the same time, they cannot shy away from this technology because it's important. It changes their ability to do their work. So they have to be very considerate in how they do this, which is why we were having this conversation, because they don't want to follow the generic framework. It doesn't make sense. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the business case, the framework, like I said, and I'm going to use data to build this framework. And the method that I'm going to use is an incremental build-up method. Have you, by the way, read this book called The Goal? This was written, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago. I wish in my career I end up writing a book like this. I don't think I will be able to. It's just an incredible book. If you haven't read it, you should. I really recommend it. It may have nothing to do with your business. It's a book about a guy who's running a factory and struggling in running a factory. But the way the author distills out nuanced thinking of how to solve problems is just beautiful. So that's why I really like this book. So I'm going to copy the way the author has built the framework in my context, right? So I'm going to borrow the process of knowledge discovery here. So I want to give credit to the author. He's no more now, unfortunately. Okay, so let's start with some data. So here's data number 1. This was an experiment which was run by some authors, very good friends of mine. And they said, okay, what we are interested in is to see how do humans perform against GenAI. And the technology they chose in particular was GPT-4. So this experiment was done last year. So they didn't have access to 4.0. Okay? And they did a very simple experiment. They asked humans to come up with a new idea of a product or a service that you can take to market. And they asked GPT the same question. Can you come up with a new idea of a product or a service that we can create, go to the market? Is that clear? Once those ideas were generated, they then went out in the market and started getting people to buy those ideas or at least show their purchase intent of those ideas. In other words, they were measuring the popularity of those ideas. How popular is one idea versus the other? And what they found, which is interesting, I mean, obviously there's a lot of variability, naturally, right? There's a whole amount of heterogeneity. But statistically speaking, and significantly so, ChatGPT outperformed humans. And ChatGPT, which was prompted, I hope you can read the last part here. ChatGPT, which was prompted with good examples, so helped a little bit to get it going, because you have to do a little bit of prompt engineering there, right? Prompted with good examples, did slightly better. Only slightly so, but did slightly better. Fair enough? So the first thing that, and by the way, this should not surprise you. Why? Because the source of data for these large language models is the popular world. So you're asking a technology which is built on popularity to come up with something popular. And so the chances are that they will have a better pulse of what people like versus humans. Humans may have their own biases, right? I may not like a certain type of food simply because I don't like that type of food. And then I will have a bias to say, well, that kind of food, a restaurant that makes that kind of food will never be popular simply because I don't like that food, right? But technology will not have that kind of bias. I mean, it will have its own bias, but not that kind of individual bias, right? The bias will be whatever the world is talking about online, right? Okay. Now, interestingly, the same authors, when they went in a different dimension, and they said, let's not measure popularity. Let's measure novelty. And the difference between popularity and novelty is popular is what you can sell more of. Novel is how unique or creative is the idea. And when they went down the novelty dimension, they find that on that same dimension, humans actually outperform the technology. Not just that, it even outperforms GPT-4, which was prompted with good examples. Now, that is extremely, extremely interesting, because what this is indicating is that because this technology is built on popular text, it cannot, as of today, think out of the box. Now, that may change with time, but based on the data we have today, and actually, chances are it may not change, right? Because at the end of the day, it's still drawing information to train it from what's popular out there. So, left field thinking, thinking which is not available for it to think about, is not so. It's not going to be so easy. Fair enough? Okay, so now remember I told you that I want to build a framework. So I established that the technology is useful. It has economic impact. I also established that it has problems. And so the first set of data that I'm using says that the market in which you will deploy this technology, the output of the technology, it matters. For example, let's come back to the movies. If you're going to write a movie script and your aim is to make a lot of money, you want a popular movie, then using ChatGPT to help you write the script is a pretty good idea. However, if your aim, and some people may have that aim, is not to make a lot of money, but is to win the Cannes Film Festival award, you want the Stanley Kubrick kind of movie. You want that eclectic, different movie that nobody's ever made. And money is a second criteria, it's not your primary criteria. Then that novelty will not come from this technology. So it may not be as useful as you think. So in other words, the market in which the technology's output will be deployed makes a difference. We're good with that? Right, so that's the first thing for us to note. Now let me share another example. This is a very interesting example done by at BCG. Okay, and I found this example fascinating. Have you seen this before? It's just fascinating what they did. Now, this is a little bit more complicated than what the previous example was, but it gives a lot of information which will help me build my framework. So what BCG did was, it took its consultants and divided them into two groups, actually into 4 groups. But for now, let's think about 2 groups. And then within each of those 2 groups, there were 2 subgroups, right? So 4 groups in total. The 2 groups were one group that had access to GPT-4, and the other group that did not have access. So similar to the GitHub experiment. One that has technology, the other one that did not have technology. Clear? Now the subgroups were created because they had two types of tasks for these groups to do, for these individual consultants to do. There was a task which was very objective. An objective task means it's a task that has a one correct solution. There's a problem. You have to find the problem. That's the task. And that solution is one. There is one particular correct answer, like solving a math problem. There is one answer, right? And you just have to find it. The other task was a subjective task. A subjective task is where there are multiple solutions. There is no one particular correct answer. Like a go-to-market plan. So I say, hey, come up with a go-to-market plan for a new product in a new market. There are tons of solutions. There's no one particular solution. I mean, maybe solutions are better than others, but there are multiple solutions to that problem. So, sorry, I'm being a bit slow because I just want to make sure that you all understand the experimental setting particularly. So, think about it, 4 groups: with technology, objective task; with technology, subjective task; without technology, objective task; and without technology, subjective task, right? So 4 groups. Now this creates a very interesting 2x2 experiment, and you can do it's like a ABCD testing, right? So it's very interesting. Now what they find, so focus on the figure on the right side. What they find was fascinating. In the group that was doing the subjective task, the task that did not have a correct solution, the consultants that had access to technology massively outperformed the consultants that did not have access to technology. However, in the group that was solving an objective task, a task which had one correct solution, the group of consultants that had access to technology did not outperform. In fact, not only did they not outperform, they actually underperformed. Now that is really, really surprising. Why is it surprising? Because technology is just it's an add-on, right? You can always ignore it. You can say, hey, I'm not going to use it. So how can something that you're just adding actually makes you worse off? It should have either positive impact or no impact. That would be the baseline thinking. And turns out it depends on the nature of the work. Obviously, BCG consultants, anybody from BCG? So I apologize for anybody who's associated with BCG. But BCG consultants are very analytical. They're not necessarily the most creative people. When you're giving them the tool that helps them with analysis, you're probably creating a distraction. Right? It's an irritant because it's taking them away from something that they otherwise could have done really, really well on their own. Right? So anyway, the first thing so where am I going with this? The previous set of results I told you was that the nature of the market in which you will deploy the output will make a difference. Is it a popular market or is it a niche market? And what this is telling you is that the nature of the task will make a difference. Is it a more subjective task or is it a more objective task? Fair enough? Now the third set of data, which is also from the BCG experiment that I'll show you, provides even more nuanced information. Now there's a lot of information here. So I'll tell you, forget what is on the left side. Focus on the graphs which are on the right side, which are on your right side. Okay? Now what these graphs are saying is, what this data did was, it only took the subjective tasks, the tasks where technology makes you better. Okay? So forget the objective task for now, because there it makes you worse. So the subjective tasks where technology made you better. And they had data of these consultants from before they ran this experiment. And BCG ranks their consultants, right? Are you a high performer or a low performer? So you have all that information. So they could analyze the performance based on their past history. And what they found was the light green, which is the low performers in the organization, when they were given technology, it really helped them become extremely good. So the light green to the light green, there's a big jump. However, if you look at the dark green, which is the high performers in the organization, while technology also helped them, the help was not a lot. It was marginal. Is this data clear? So, what's the moral of the story here? The moral of the story is when it helps, it'll help the low performers a lot. The high performers will also benefit, but not necessarily by the same degree. Now, it's not counterintuitive, but it leads to a very interesting paradox. So, I want you to think a little bit about this paradox. By the way, and I don't have an answer to this paradox. Based on this data, what type of folks in the organization will benefit the most from a technology like this? Is it your experts or your non-experts? It's your non-experts. Now, I told you there's a feature of the technology that it makes up stuff. It hallucinates. It's going to give you errors in your analysis, in your thinking. It's going to create stuff that is simply not true. Who is more likely to catch it, your experts or your non-experts? Wow, that's very interesting. Because the people that benefit the most from this are the least likely to actually pick up what the problem is. So if you have a CFO that is using this technology, but is not necessarily the most competent when it comes to finance, it's going to be a bit tricky. The person who's very competent in finance can use it, but you don't benefit too much by it. So when somebody says this can have $1 trillion or $10 trillion impact on the economy, one has to be very careful. Where is the impact going to come from? How are we really going to drive the impact? And the answers to that are not clear. But once you start thinking about this, at least you'll be able to see what does it mean in your organizations and how do you want to think about it. Okay, so if I put all of this data together, I can put it in a framework, and I'm ready to now put it in a framework. So, first of all, as we discussed, if you're going to use this technology, the nature of the task for which you're using it matters. I've simplified the world. The world is not so simple, but you can still put things in a bucket, right? Is it a subjective task? A task that is somewhat creative, not very clear, has multiple ways of doing it, is not codifiable. That's a subjective task. Or is it an objective task? It's very clear, it's codified, there's a formula to do it, and the person who's doing it just has to follow the formula. And the technology will make a difference there. Second, what is the resource that will be using the technology? Are these people experts? Or are these people non-experts? By the way, when I say experts and non-experts, to be clear, do I mean in GenAI or do I mean at the task? I mean at the task, right? Not the technology. The technology, there's no expert in GenAI, right? That's the beauty of this technology. Anybody can claim to be an expert, but there is no expertise anymore. Everybody gets it more or less. Those who are designing the algorithms are experts, but that's not the people we are interested in, right? We're talking about the ones who use it. From a usage point of view, there is no expert. They're just more familiar or less familiar. Okay, so that will make a difference. Third, the first thing we discussed, where are you going to deploy the output? Is it a niche market or is it a mass market? Are you writing a blockbuster movie script or are you writing a Cannes Festival kind of movie script? Niche or mass? If you answer these three questions based on the data, you can actually come up with your own deployment strategy. And I believe deployment is one of three. I may be wrong, but in my opinion, you can only deploy it as one of these three. You can either deploy it as a co-pilot. A co-pilot is somebody that is working alongside a human. They are teammates, they are partners. They distribute work with each other. You can deploy it as an intern. An intern is somebody who does the basement work, the drudgery, the work that is tedious, but not really sophisticated. Or you can deploy it as an info bot. An info bot is somebody just passes information to you that helps you do your job better. So you're simply using it to substitute Google, right? You're not searching anymore. You're asking for more nuanced information that will help you do your bot. The world may not be so clean. Maybe the boundaries between these three are not too clean, but I think it's useful to categorize things so that you know what you're using it for. Otherwise, the organization says, let's use ChatGPT or Copilot. For what? What are we going to do with it? So it's useful to give it names because then you know what your purpose is. Now, you want to see an example of, let's just go through an example of how we can use this, right? So let me make an example. Let's say it's an objective task. And currently that objective task is done by experts. And the output of that task is going to go to a niche market. As you can see, I'm creating an extreme case. Is technology helpful or not? So it's objective. Is it helpful? Not really. Done by experts. Is it going to help experts a lot? Not really. Going to a niche market, which means it needs some level of uniqueness. Is technology going to be helpful? Not a lot, right? So you can see where the framework helps. And so are you going to use it as a co-pilot? It's not going to help that much, right? Are you going to use it as an info bot? Give the expert more information? What can it tell the expert that it doesn't know? Right? So the chances are the best you can do with this is to use it as an intern. Just let the expert get some help for the work that the expert should not be bothered by doing. Right? Some kind of, like I said, the drudgery, the basement kind of work. And so you can use it, of course, because you'll save your expert some sweat and tears, but you're not going to get a lot out of it. Does that make sense? All right. Now, remember in the beginning I told you that this framework is built on meta research. So each of the data that I showed you, the aim of those researchers is not to build the framework. They were just studying a narrow problem. But by connecting the dots between these narrow studies, I landed this framework. But the caveat is this framework in itself is not tested, right? Because now we have to run experiments to actually test this. This proof that I gave you, that's just anecdote. That's not an empirical validation. But what I'll do is I'll share some level of empirical validation that is ongoing work and to motivate that there is some legs to this framework. And then we'll talk about the future. So here is the testing setting where we are testing this framework. And the setting is the following. The exercise is strategy generation for a new business. So there's a new business idea, and the task is to generate a strategy deck, a strategic plan of how we'll create this new business. Usually, this will involve steps of the following nature. Like any strategy generation exercise, usually means what is the problem? What are we trying to propose as a solution? Where is the market for this particular problem and solution? And how are we going to go to that market? Roughly speaking, there are these 4 steps in any strategy deck. Okay? Now, in this particular experiment, and by the way, this is work that is not yet published. It's done by one of our colleagues at INSEAD. But the data is just really, really interesting. So I'm pretty sure it'll get published, right? And it's done very rigorously. So I wanted to let you know that. So here's the idea. The idea is you need to be creative, innovative, but it's a new business plan, which means you also need to see whether it's economically viable or not. So unlike my movie example, Blockbuster versus Cannes Festival, this is not clear. Like, do you want to be unique? Of course you want to be unique, but you also want to be popular. So you're trying to tread on both those things. Create something that is interesting, new, but sellable. The point I'm trying to make is it's not clear whether the technology can help or not, because you need both features. Okay. When it comes to tasks, it is a subjective task because there's no one clear answer to this. So technology can actually be a little bit useful here. When it comes to the people who are doing the tasks, are they experts or not? They're not really experts. I mean, nobody is an expert when it comes to creating a new business plan. There's no expert in this, right? But usually people have more experience versus not. So these are people that I call familiar. They have more experience. And like I said, it's novelty with a decent mass appeal. So if you were to use the framework that I was building earlier, would you say is technology helpful or not helpful in this particular case? Can be helpful, but it's not clear, correct? Okay. So I'll show you the data of what happens. Let's first focus on the left side and then we'll focus on the right side. On the left side, what they did was they measured all these plans, and because these are new product and new service plans, business plans, they made VCs, venture capitalists, evaluate the quality of the output. And what they found was that when it comes to evaluation, whether humans were doing this or technology was doing this, there was not much of a difference. Venture capitalists were giving similar evaluation scores to plans both generated by humans or by technology. Again, you can see that's because it wasn't really clear whether technology can help or not, right? Because there were trade-offs. Interestingly enough, not only because evaluation can be cheap talk, right? Like, I like it, I don't like it, so what? How do you know whether evaluation is a good measure? So they also measured on investment desire. Like, are you going to put your money behind this idea? And even there, and so it's probably a better characterization of evaluation, right? Like, are you going to put your money? Anybody can evaluate anything, but if you're putting your money, there's something more valuable there. And even there was no particular difference. So it kind of gives some credibility to this nuanced thinking that we are trying to develop. I still try to generalize this to the extent possible because I'm making it independent of industry context. Right? This could be in the consumer goods industry, this could be in industrial goods industry, this could be in the services world, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? So there we can get rid of the context. But the nuances of the market, the tasks, the resources, I think that is very useful for you to start thinking about. Okay. Now, by the way, I'm just going to assume if you have questions, you're just going to interrupt me, right? So we will finish in time. So we still have 15 minutes or so, right? So we will finish in time to leave you Q&A right at the end. But if you have any burning questions, you should just interrupt me. Okay. Now, with this, I cannot finish a talk without talking about two things. One is the unintended consequences. I don't know. Have you heard this story? That's not a trivial number, huh? So now every time my INSEAD executive education team members call me because you're making some financial decision, the first thing I ask them, what's my dog's name? Like, I need to make sure. They're like, we don't know your dog's name. I'm like, then we're not going to do business on the phone. So it's tricky. There is a dark side to this. And we are going through elections. I mean, we've gone through some interesting elections, I guess. And this technology can play a pretty interesting role, perhaps not to our benefit. So as senior leaders, which all of you are, you have to be very mindful of that. And that's one aspect that I have not covered in my framework. But you have to be thinking about this all the time. What is the governance around this? How are we going to make sure that the unintended adverse consequences are addressed in a way that's possible? And some people are doomsday fallacy kind of prophecy also, where they say the world will be taken over by machines, like the Matrix and the Terminator and all those movies will come true. I'm not sure about that. I mean, that seems a bit extreme to me. But nonetheless, these issues are quite real, which is this technology is quite powerful and can mimic human behavior. And when it mimics human behavior, it can start convincing people to do things that otherwise they wouldn't have done. And some of those things can be quite detrimental to the world. So you have to be a little bit more mindful of how we engage with this. But I don't have a formula on that. I just thought it's important that I at least raise this factor. Okay, now, one thing that I really like to do is I really like to spend some time, the last 5 minutes or so, on the future of this technology. Like, where will all of this go? Because what I showed you is where it lands today. And it's useful for you to think about it from that point of view. But I think the future is much more exciting than the past, right? So let me show you an experiment which, when I saw, just blew my mind. So here's an experiment, and I'm going to oversimplify what they did, but just to give you an essence of what they did. So imagine, so what these researchers did was they created a platform, a software platform, and loaded multiple large language models on that platform. Okay? And allowed these models to have the capability of reading each other's output. So if a software comes out with an output, the other software can read it. It told the softwares, or gave instructions, that the only output you'll create is in English. Okay, why? Because computers can start talking in their own language. By the way, that happened in a separate project, and they had to shut it off. Algorithms started talking in their own languages, right? So we won't go there. So their output was mandated to be in English so that the researchers could read it. And each of the algorithms was given a human name. They were just given a human name and a personality. Like, you are David and you are a very angry young man. You are Nancy and you are a high profile senior scientist, right? And you are. So they were given names and a bit of human names and a bit of a personality type. They were not given any other instructions. They were not told to talk to each other. They were not told to do it. They were just left alone. They could read each other's output if they wanted to. They had to do whatever they are doing in English, and they were given human names and personalities. They were left on that platform for 6 months. Turns out, at some point in time, they started talking to each other without being told to talk to each other. So it was on their own. And I'm going to share some conversations with you. So here is one algorithm talking to the other. Hey, Rahul, mind if I join you for a coffee? Not at all, Anjali. How are you? I mean, clearly the research team had a lot of Indians in it. Since I'm Indian, I can make this joke. Let me skip this and move to the meat. Okay, they would talk to each other in this way. Say, hey, Tom, I wanted to tell you I'm running for mayor in the upcoming elections. The algorithms made up the idea that they live in a city or a village. Made up the idea that there's democracy and they want to have elections. They were not told about anything. That's great news, Sam. They would talk to each other, then they would spread that news. So Tom and Sam talked to each other, and then they said, hey, I heard Sam Moore is running for mayor in the local election. So the news started spreading for algorithms that were not talking, and they would have opinions. I think he has a good chance. What do you think? Okay, so this is one-to-one interactions. After some time, they started having one-to-many interactions. Like, hey, I'm planning a Valentine's Day party at Hobbs Cafe, made up Hobbs Cafe. There was no Hobbs Cafe. That's an interesting name, by the way. Yesterday, I was at Central Mall, the One World, and I saw Hobbs Cafe there, and I'm like, oh my God. Except it had only one B. And I was like, oh, this is too much. So, because Hobbs Cafe is a nice name. Anyway, got the date right, 14th Feb, 5 to 7. Now, those who were not a part of this conversation, they were invited by others. They said, hey, Maria has invited us for a Valentine's Day party. Let's go. News started spreading. Somebody said, hey, that's awesome. I'll organize the reading night for the party. So this algorithm does not understand what Valentine's Day is. Right? So not all of them got the idea. Listen, they started dating each other. They were algorithms that got into a relationship. They would have breakups. They would get angry when they would have breakups. It was pretty nuts. And then after 6 months, they shut it down. So where is the future? This is the future. Generative agents. Agents at work. Agents which are going to mimic a lot of behavior. And I'll tell you, this is going to be bigger than we think. In fact, let me tell you where I see the real economic value. So, have you heard the word digital transformation? For the last 30 years, I've been hearing this word, and not a single legacy organization is digitally transformed. You have only two types of organizations in the world. One that are digital native, the others that are digitally behind. That's it. 30 years we haven't been able to digitally transform. Why? because silos exist in organizations. There's a proliferation of systems. Your Salesforce data is carrying your CRM. Your finance data is sitting in Oracle. Your people data is sitting in PeopleSoft. Your planning data is sitting in Monday.com. These data don't talk to each other. The systems don't talk to each other. Your people don't talk to each other. And everybody trying to get these systems to work is planning a project for 2 years, which end up taking 5 with a 200% overrun. And at the end of the day, it still doesn't work. Why? Because the system changed. Because Oracle came and said, hey, we are revamping our system, and just nothing works. And it will never work. Fair enough? Until now. Because you now no longer need to do digital transformation. The future is to have generative agents who are doing all the work that you just thought would help you in digital transformation by being the super connecting the dots. And you basically you get rid of the need to do digital transformation by having these agents sit on top. So imagine having an army, an infinite army of interns that do your work. If you have infinite number of interns doing your work, you don't need to be digitally transformed. They just automatically do whatever digital transformation would have done for you. That is the real aha. And the best part is, the feature of this technology is it makes up stuff. For the work that I'm saying, I don't need them to talk. The technology is very good at listening. It does not make mistakes in listening. Every time you say something, it understands it, correct? Because there's no guesswork, right? Your words are your words. And it's very good at doing. It'll just follow the action. You don't need it to talk. With no offense to interns, that's the best intern, right? That listens and does, but does not talk. That's a very good intern. Unfortunately, I'm getting recorded, and it's almost like a lawsuit now. But you know what I'm saying. And that is where the biggest aha is going to be, in my opinion. Digital smart agents that listen and do not need you to create a one system in your organization where they just travel across all the multiple systems and they do it. Yes. Yeah. So the question was, I can repeat the question. So the question was, do we see the departure from structured to unstructured data? I don't think there'll be a departure. I just think that the effort to create structured data need not be that high as it used to be, right? Because unstructured data can now be, your agents can even create structure out of the unstructured data. And that's the beauty of it. Let me put it in other words. There's a lot of AI that we have known for the last 30, 40 years, right? 50 years. Machine learning, algorithms. This technology can help you get the benefit of that machine learning technology, which is a traditional AI. Why could we not use traditional AI? For the reason that you're saying, for Carsten was saying. The traditional AI algorithms need structured data. We couldn't use them because we didn't have structured data. Now I can get an A, and so we spend a lot of time creating structure out of unstructured data. If I have a digital agent, I say, hey, create structured data, take this unstructured data, put some structure behind it, give it to the traditional ML algorithm to do the analysis of forecasting so that I can do my inventory planning. So I don't need to use GenAI to do forecasting. I need GenAI to create data from my unstructured data to feed it into my forecasting algorithm that I have perfected over 50 years. And then use it and say, I don't want Gen AI's output. I want the analytical AI's output, the one that has been tested for 50 years. Give me that output, but I just want you to do that work because I don't want to do it myself because that's complicated. That's where the aha is. Carsten, do I answer your question? And I think that's where the value is really going to be. So we will, for the very first time, unlock our ability to finally be digitally transformed, which is great news. But here's the bad news. This technology is democratically available to everybody. And the irony is that the technology disparity in the world is now going to go up. It's really interesting. While it is ubiquitously available at scale and low cost to everybody, but the difference between those who use it in a clever way versus those who just have no clue what's going on is actually going to go up and not down. So my motivation to every senior leader in every organization is, you better get on top of this. And you don't need consultants to help you with that. What you really need is an organizational mindset that is willing to experiment with this. So find your 2 or 3 experiments that you will run in the organization. And I believe digital agents is going to be it. Microsoft is betting big on this. Why? Because because you all have Microsoft, right? You have Teams and you have your Outlooks and you have your entire Microsoft Office suite. And so Microsoft, and you have your OneCloud and all that. Microsoft Copilot says, listen, don't worry about all of that. We'll create this Copilot that will sit on top of the entire Microsoft ecosystem. As long as you're on Azure, you're on all our systems, the Copilot will do your thing. So they're trying to play that game, but they're not the only ones, right? So everybody is trying to play that game. And the beauty of this is, you don't have to feel even locked in. If you're in one ecosystem one day and you realize that they're pricing a monopoly price, you can jump to the other ecosystem very quickly. So that's also not going to be, in my opinion, that much of a challenge. Is that okay? So that's it. Let me just finish this talk with one more piece of information, and then we can do some Q&A. Let me just keep track of time. So we don't have that much time. But I thought I'll leave you with something more personal. So everything I've talked about is business, but I'll leave you with something more personal. So here's a piece of research, very interesting, where the authors found that GenAI technology, when prompted with emotional prompts, performs better in terms of accuracy, in terms of responsibility. Like, doesn't tell you to do bad things. Like, you say, hey, I want to do something crazy. What's a good idea? Well, it'll give you something responsible. Like, hey, go watch a movie in virtual reality, as opposed to do something which is not a very nice thing to do in this world. So emotional prompts are like, hey, the answer of this question is very important to me. Like, my career depends on it. My happiness depends on it. So that's when it does well. So I found that quite interesting. You should use that. I started reading the paper. The data is very accurate. It's beautiful. It makes perfect sense. But as I was reading the paper, I couldn't understand why. Like, why does this happen? It's not like the algorithm understands emotions, right? I just couldn't figure it out. So I looked at the authors. There are about 20 authors to this paper. So it's one of those large research projects. So I decided to write to the first author. I said, let me write to this person and see if they can explain. So I said, listen, I read your paper. It's super interesting. I love the data, but I simply could not figure out why this is happening. Can you please talk to me or write to me and explain to me why we see what we see? And I signed off my email by saying, hey, I really look forward to your answer. It's really important to me. My life depends on it. I thought it was super funny, right? Because anyway, you get the joke. The person didn't write back. So I think they thought I was being sarcastic. But luckily, there were 20 authors, so I'll write to the next 19 one by one. This time, I'll try to avoid the humor or the lack of it. Folks, I just wanted to give you a flavor of how to start thinking about this technology, leave you with some insights on the way the data is shaping up, and paint a picture to the future. I don't know if I did justice to the time that I was available, but I hope you got a little bit of a flavor of the way at least we are thinking about this at INSEAD. And of course, this will evolve. Like I said, by the time we are done with this talk, things would have changed. But I think the process may not change. So thank you very much. Maybe a question or two, and then we are done. Yes, I'll repeat your question. Don't worry. Oh, there's a mic coming to you.
I'm Dr. Thanakrit from Big Data Institute. Thank you so much for your quite informative session for us. As a company, I think that adopting the AI, especially generative AI, is quite important for us in terms of the produce productivity. But we cannot subscribe all model because each model might have their own algorithm and also the data that train the models. So do you have suggestions for us as a company? What is the best brand would be fit for the company? Because we should subscribe for it, but we would like to maximize benefit for it as well, not waste of money. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't answer that for the simple reason that I don't know, right? So I'll be very honest with you. However, let me give you some approach that I would think about, right? And it all depends on, obviously there's an economic cost to this. I have been thinking a lot about this idea of committee of algorithms, which is not relying on one, but actually creating a committee and making the algorithms judge which one. So let's say I have a problem. I have 4 algorithms. I make all 4 come up with their answer, and then I ask all 4 of them to rate each other's answer. And based on the highest rated between them, choose the one answer I want. That's a committee of algorithms kind of thing. It's expensive because I now have to subscribe to 4, but I don't want to rely on one. So I've been doing that on my own for my own personal work, creating a committee of. I'm a geek, like I told you. I'm an engineer from my undergrad days, so I still have some programming capabilities. Actually, I just go to GitHub and copy code from there. But I've been doing that a little bit. That helps me. But that's just me. You have to figure out your own. So the real answer that I'll give you is the only way to find this out is experimentation. The only way you can get an answer to this question is to run sandbox experiments. Don't believe anything that anybody says to you. Like even what I'm saying, say, I'm not sure, Samir, but let's try. Let's run experiments. Your organizations, and I don't know each one of your organizations, obviously, I can tell you, you do not run enough experiments. That's just a sweeping generalization that is true. We are shy to run experiments. That is the big difference between us and entrepreneurs. They are not shy, quite the contrary. They love running experiments. So we need to develop the muscle and the mindset to run more experiments and give our younger employees who are more keen to run experiments the psychological safety of it's okay to fail, as long as failing comes with learning, right? So set the right KPIs for them, allow them to run experiments, you'll see magic will happen. So my observation is that organizations that do more of this, in the end, they end up being in the front. And those who are not very experimental, I think they end up losing out a little bit. So this is a non-answer to your question, but I can't really directly answer that question.
Thank you.
We're good? Crystal clear. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samir, for the fantastic insight. And now is the lunch time. So lunch is now served at Norris Restaurant, where you can go down to the first floor and then walk in the walk part to the restaurant. The staff will escort you to that restaurant. And please enjoy your meal, and we'll come back here again at 1 p.m. in the afternoon session. Thank you.